I want to welcome everybody to our Q1 2022 Bitcoin Mining Council briefing. We're really delighted to have you with us today. This is an awesome quarterly result. This is our first full year report. We've now had 4 of these, and so we can actually look back a year at our results year over year. As you can see, we've got 44 Bitcoin mining companies that are represented in our results today, and they represent 50% of the global Bitcoin mining network. And so that's the first, the largest number of Bitcoin miners participating in the survey and the largest percentage of hash power. I'd like to share with you the agenda for today's program. I'm Michael Saylor. I'm the CEO of MicroStrategy, and I'm going to start by laying out our agenda. We're going to have Taras cover data aggregation and our methodology and offer a few explanations first. How did we actually arrive at our results? Then we're going to have a Q1 2022 update that I'll lead, and I'll take you through our results and compare them to previous quarters and year over year. Then Darin Feinstein is going to offer some Bitcoin industry updates. Then Nick Carter is going to provide us with a Bitcoin public policy update, which we're really excited about today. And then we'll end with some questions and answers that have been submitted by industry analysts and other media figures and industry watchers. So with that, Taras, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, Mike. So a quick overview of the data collection this quarter. We've been surveying the existing and new BMC membership for the self-reported data. It's done on a pseudo-anonymous basis so that myself and the folks compiling can't necessarily match up who's submitting to the data itself. This is to ensure that private miner data is kept confidential. We are very pleased to report that we now have reporting coverage from 5 different continents, representing likely all continents where mining has taken place. Hopefully by next quarter, we'll have a little bit more data set for us to start disclosing regional distribution. Additionally, this quarter, we are still relying on the British Petroleum energy statistics that they publish annually. We really do believe that it is the premier source of energy information that we're using to be able to compare and contrast the Bitcoin mining network footprint versus energy globally. This quarter, we have some analysis on carbon dioxide emission. And what we're doing there is extrapolating Bitcoin mining globally, applying the percentage of carbon dioxide emissions from the United States electrical grid against all of Bitcoin mining. And the reason being is because there are variations between regions of carbon dioxide emission for the terawatt hours used. And so we use the US as a proxy for global versus more efficient in some areas, less efficient in others. And so we're quite pleased with the data set, and we know this is now beyond statistically significant, and we anticipate our numbers and participation to continue to grow within the Bitcoin mining network. I think I'll hand it back over to you, Mike, to get into the meat of it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about this next section because we've now got Q1 of 2022. We can compare it to the previous year, Q1 of 2021. So Taras, can we go to the next slide? We've had more Bitcoin miners joining us, and they continue to join every quarter. So if you know of any that aren't members, please send them our way. We're up to 44 mining companies, as Taras had said, 5 different continents. The real key is we're 50% of the hash rate. We started off at about 32% of the hash rate. And so as we become a greater and greater portion of the hash rate, of course, we become more statistically significant, and we're starting to see the entire BMC reflect the greater Bitcoin mining network. Let's go to the next slide. So let's start with the executive summary in Q1 2022. Bitcoin mining uses an inconsequential amount of global energy. Turns out that Bitcoin mining is about 16 basis points, or 16 1/100ths of a percent of global energy. So when you think about it, putting in perspective, 99.98%, 99.8% of the power is something else. Bitcoin is fairly small. But even more interestingly, Bitcoin generates negligible carbon emissions. We looked at carbon, and it turns out that slightly more than 8%, 8 basis points of the carbon emissions in the world come from Bitcoin mining. So putting this in perspective, 8/100ths of 1%, 99.92% of all the carbon emissions in the world is something else. There are reasons why it's only 8 basis points and not even 16 basis points. And of course, the answer is because of sustainability. Bitcoin mining hash rate is up 23% year over year. So the security of the network is up 23% for the year, but the energy usage is actually down 25%. And that's a very surprising result. And it's due to the efficiency explosion, a surge in efficiency, 63% more efficiency, and also to the rotation of mining from the east to the west and the retirement of inefficient equipment. We talk more about that later in the presentation. 63% surge in efficiency is pretty extraordinary, though, as a year-over-year result. The third point, which is really critical, is that Bitcoin is the industry leader in sustainability with 58% sustainable energy mix. 58% is kind of unprecedented. There is no industry in the world that actually runs with 58% sustainable energy mix. It's better than planes, trains, automobiles, construction, medicine, food, most anything, defense, traditional banking, whatever you might think of. We can't find anywhere in the world an industry that's actually running at something north of 58% sustainable energy mix for some reasons that we'll show later in the presentation. So that's the headlines. Let's go to the next slide. We've got some breakdowns of all of these things: energy and sustainability and carbon emissions. And I'd like to show you these in more detail. So let's go to the next slide. Overall energy, 154,750 terawatt hours of total energy generated worldwide. Bitcoin is 247 terawatt hours of that. So if the blue circle is all the energy, the little green line that we're pointing toward is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, again, is negligible in the greater scheme of things as an energy provider. It's, again, 16/100ths of a percent. This just illustrates it graphically. Next slide. We looked at carbon emissions, and it's even, of course, more negligible when it comes to carbon emissions. There's 34.8 billion metric tons of carbon emission, and Bitcoin is 0.03. So again, the green line illustrates it. Bitcoin's neither the source of or the solution to the carbon emission problem. It's really just a rounding error, right, in carbon emissions for any major industry. And I think most people have long suspected it, but I think we show with this slide and with this analysis that it really is de minimis and negligible as a source of carbon emissions. And the reason why it's much smaller than even the energy usage is because Bitcoin mining is, of course, much more sustainable. On average, 80% of the energy in the world is coming from carbon sources, but 58% of the energy that's powering the Bitcoin network is not carbon related. So Bitcoin mining in general is just cleaner and greener than any other major industry. And you can see that it's reflected here in this carbon emissions number, which if we actually drew it to scale, it'd probably be smaller than the little green line that we're pointing out there, but that just gives you a sense of what it means to the world. Next slide. We've charted or graphed Bitcoin mining energy usage against every major country, and you can see it's de minimis. Critics will say it's bigger than country B, but they always pick a country which is 0.1% of the energy usage in the world to make it sound big. But of course, you could pretty much show every major industry uses more than any de minimis country too, for the same reason. So when you compare Bitcoin mining to every major other use, it's fairly small. 247 versus 154,715. Next slide. We've graphed sustainability against each country's grids. And so you can see the BMC members, the 50% of the network that actually participates in our survey is 64.6% sustainable. And of course, the entire power grid in the United States is only 31%. So on average, we're twice as sustainable as every other major user of electricity in the United States, which is interesting. You can see if you're using electricity off of the standard grid anywhere in the world, you're less sustainable than the Bitcoin network. So that's another way of saying that just about any data center, any hospital, any building, any home, anything using electricity off of the grid is going to be running on sustainable energy mix, which is less than 64.6 or 58.4%. And the reason why Bitcoin miners, again, are far in excess of this is they can locate at the edge of the grid, and they can locate and find stranded renewable energy that can't easily be used by other industries. If I want to run a hospital in a major city, I can't relocate the hospital 1,000 miles away from the major city, and I can't bring power from 1,000 miles away to the hospital in the city. So that hospital is going to run on the grid, and it's going to run at 21.7% sustainable power mix if it's anywhere in the world on average. And of course, Bitcoin miners are always going to go to the edge of the grid, and they're always going to look for the cheapest energy, which happens to be the renewable energy, which is a sustainable energy. And that's why we're exceeding all the other users. Can we go to the next slide? So here we show Bitcoin mining versus every other industry, and we're just showing the absolute usage of energy. And you can see, we really use energy for residential buildings and vehicles and air conditioning and construction and finance and shipping and name the application, healthcare. All of those things are much larger industrial users of energy, and they're using energy which is much more carbon based and much less sustainable. If they're off the grid, like planes and trains and automobiles are, then they're all carbon generally. And if they're on the grid, then they're running at the 21.7% average sustainability mix of the grid worldwide. And you have to be very fortunate and have the ability to relocate your power consumption to the edge in order to avoid being part of the mean. We've, of course, compared Bitcoin mining usage to gold mining and computer games and holiday lights, and you can see that it's about the same order of magnitude as those. Next slide. So here we've got a quarterly result, all of our quarterly results compared. This is really the meat of the presentation. You can see we've now got 5 quarters worth of information. And in Q1, what we saw was a 12% increase in electricity consumption for the entire network. And on the other hand, we saw a 19% increase in the hash rate. So why is the energy consumption growing slower than the hash rate? Well, that's because of the efficiency. The efficiency increased by 6%, right? And that makes the big difference. Over time, the new capacity that's coming online is much more efficient hardware. And so you're getting more hashes for less energy. And you can see this is a persistent march. In the lower left corner, you can see we've gone from 12.6 exahash per gigawatt to 14.4 to 17.7 to 19.3 to 20.5. So a persistent quarter over quarter march forward in mining efficiency. And that's been coupled, much to our delight, with a persistent improvement in sustainability, where we moved from 36.8% sustainable to 56 to 57 to 58. And clearly the big change in the Bitcoin mining industry is the China exodus that took place between Q1 and Q2, where a lot of antiquated equipment came offline. A lot of new equipment was brought online in better engineered centers that are running off of much more sustainable power in North America, and that created quite a jolt. But that major dislocation has been augmented by consistent increases in efficient modern equipment in North America, combined with continual migration toward more sustainable power sources, because the Bitcoin mining industry is now being driven by well-financed, publicly traded North American companies, and they're pretty focused upon finding sustainable energy mix. They're very focused upon installing the newest equipment. They're engineering mining centers with breakthrough new technologies like immersion cooling, and of course, just as the passage of time takes place, human ingenuity and engineering is installed in the industry, and we're using that to make things run cleaner and faster and more efficiently. So, whereas the BMC members represent 45% of the global energy consumption in megawatts, they're actually 50% of the hash rate. And you can see this trend continuing. The overall sustainable electricity mix of the BMC members is 64.6. So as they grow, and they're growing faster than the rest of the world because they're better financed, as they grow, then the energy mix of the overall Bitcoin network is going to track and going to follow that number and trend toward that number and beyond. And the same is true with the mining efficiency. Whereas if the rest of the world was replaced or shut down and the BMC doubled in size tomorrow, the entire network would go from 20.5 to 22.9 exahash per gigawatt. So you can expect that the trend will be toward the green bars here. Shall we go to the next slide? Here's our year over year results, and this is kind of really a neat finding. Mining efficiency surged 63% year over year, and the sustainable electricity mix increased 59% year over year. And we saw how it happened quarter by quarter, but when you put the year over year numbers together on a chart, it's just pretty incredible, and it really accentuates what's going on here, which is the network is growing and getting more secure. The hash rate is increasing while the consumption is decreased. The efficiency is exploding, and we're rotating from carbon-based energy sources toward renewable energy sources as well-capitalized Western Bitcoin mining operations take over more and more of the hash rate of the network. Shall we go to the next slide? A lot of times people think that Bitcoin is using energy to secure the network. That's half true. It's energy, but it's also technology, semiconductor technology, and over time, the trend in energy is we're migrating from less sustainable to more sustainable energy sources. And we're migrating from convenient, more expensive energy to the edge of the grid to stranded renewable energy that might otherwise be wasted. The trend in technology is a trend toward progressively more efficient semiconductors. Bitcoin mining's 5,814% more efficient in the past 8 years. And you can see we went from 877,000 joules per terahash required when we started to 1,250 joules per terahash the beginning of December 2013 to 98 joules per terahash with the Antminer S9 that came out in 2016. And of course, the S19s, as of about a year ago, were 29.5 joules per terahash. And now the next generation is trending down toward 21.5 joules per terahash. You know, another way to think about this is it takes 29.5 megawatts of power to create an exahash if you're using an S19, but an S19 XP does the same amount of work with 21.5 megawatts. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's happening here. You're seeing a rotation of the network from energy intensive to semiconductor intensive or technology intensive. And that means that the well-capitalized Bitcoin miners are buying the most efficient equipment. They're bringing the most hash rate online, and their break-evens in terms of energy are higher than the old generation equipment, right? If you're running that Antminer U1, you know, it would cost you something on the order of 40 times as much energy to get the same output. And so that means that when a modern Bitcoin miner can make money at 40 cents a kilowatt hour, the antiquated one, the 8-year-old one, has to pay no more than 1 penny a kilowatt hour to break even. So as we bring on new semiconductors, we keep squeezing down the break-even point unless your energy is effectively zero, you're not going to make any money. And this is the process by which the equipment eventually will get retired. Probably not in a 4 to 6 year time frame, but in an 8 to 12 year time frame, certainly the equipment starts getting retired because the break-even points are just too low, and you can't afford to pay for the energy to run them because you're being outcompeted by some super hyper modern ASIC. We've calculated the global joules per terahash estimate for the entire Bitcoin network. And you can see it's 48.9 joules per terahash. So if you look at our chart, you can see that's kind of a mixture of S19s, which are 29.5 joules per terahash, and S9s, which are 98 joules per terahash. But, you know, there's not a lot of room for the 1,250 joules per terahash equipment, right? It just doesn't make any economic sense at some point. So as miners rotate and they keep upgrading, we'll see this joules per terahash number just keep coming down quarter by quarter. And with that, we go to the next slide. The real important and the big idea here is that Bitcoin is naturally getting more energy efficient every year, every quarter, and is getting more efficient because of the protocol, Satoshi's protocol, which creates a halving every 4 years. So for the foreseeable future, every 4 years, the block rewards get cut in half. And that means you've got about an 18% per year decrease in those block subsidies. And that's putting pressure on energy consumption. And then the second thing that's driving down energy consumption is the semiconductor improvements, those ASICs. And they've been improving at 3x every 4 years and 2x every 4 years. So you put the two dynamics together, the relentless progress of semiconductor technology combined with Satoshi's protocol, which relentlessly decreases the block rewards. And you can see that the entire network's just going to get dramatically more energy efficient in the next 8 years. It could easily be 24x more energy efficient, certainly an order of magnitude more, or even more impressive. And that will be driven, right, as these miners capitalize and as companies like Intel enter the space and they start shipping more hash power and they create more competition in the semiconductor market. So the key thing to keep in mind is although Bitcoin is an industry that uses energy, it's an industry that's using energy somewhere between 18 and 36% more efficient every year. And you can't say the same thing about planes and trains or automobiles or construction or medicine or food or traditional banking or defense. There really isn't any other major industrial user of energy that could hope to improve its efficiency by 18% a year. And so it's a built-in sustainability advantage for Bitcoin, and it is driving a lot of dynamics in this industry. We can go to the next slide. All the sources for the presentation here are presented here on this slide, so feel free to dig in if you like. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor over to Darin and ask him to give us an update on the Bitcoin industry.
Yeah, let's start on the third slide, to Ross, with the two articles. I appreciate it, and Michael, great job. It's really good to see year-over-year results. I think the most important one on an aggregate basis for everybody to really understand is the fact that last year, the Bitcoin global network used more energy than the Bitcoin global network today. So the energy use actually fell, but the hash rate went up. And so that tiny bit of information is all you really need to know. And that destroys every single mainstream media narrative that you've heard about how the Bitcoin global mining network is going to consume. And we have two articles here for you to really exclamate the point. It will consume all the world's energy. And my favorite is the World Economic Forum in 2017. And you can see the article right here. They said the Bitcoin mining network is so bad for the world that it needs to be shut off today. It needed to be shut off in 2017, or by 2020, 2 years ago, by 2020, the global Bitcoin mining network would consume all of the world's energy, all of it. And that what that would require, and you just heard Michael Saylor tell you the statistics, that the global Bitcoin mining network would consume all 154,000 terawatt hours of energy. And guess what? They're only consuming 16/100% of the global energy that's generated every year. So they were massively wrong, over 99% wrong, the World Economic Forum, and so was Newsweek. So you have two massive organizations that were wrong by over 99% on the global use of Bitcoin mining energy as a statistic globally. And so it's really important to understand that year over year, Bitcoin global energy use is down and the hash rate is up, which is in contradiction to literally every article that you could read for the last 4 years on a mainstream media narrative. So let's go back to the first slide, Taras. And so it's really important to point that out. I think there's really two purposes of our presentation today. The first is to go over our first year-to-year comparison. 2021 numbers were all going in the right direction in terms of sustainability, efficiencies, which Michael elaborated a lot on in terms of how much better the chips are, which means the joules per terahash are lower, which means, as Michael said, you get to use your equipment much more efficiently. The second part is really addressing the same narrative that has been circulated for a decade. And I think it all stems from one really important misconception that still exists today. And that question is really simple. It's, what is a Bitcoin miner? What is it? What is a Bitcoin miner? Because most people don't know, apparently, what a Bitcoin miner is. And so I'm going to tell you what it is. And here's a photo of it on this slide. It's a server. See that thing right there? It's like a rectangle. That's a computer server. It's a computer server. And guess where it goes? It goes inside of a data center. You put that rectangle in a data center and it has a plug, and you plug that into the data center, and then it uses the energy, the electricity from the data center. And after you plug it in, guess what that server does? It runs really fast computations. Guess what comes out of that server? Nothing. There's no carbon that comes out of that server. There's no emollients. There's no pollution. It just plugs into the electrical grid. And inside of that server, and there's a little photo on the bottom, it's just chips. There's just chips from a fabrication facility. And so that's what a Bitcoin miner is. It's a really bad name. It's a little bit confusing, but all it is a computer server, and it lives inside of a data center. And so Bitcoin mining companies are data center companies. They're just data center companies. They're not generating electricity or generating energy. And so there's a big misconception in what Bitcoin mining companies do. People think Bitcoin mining companies pollute the environment, which is impossible because we're not generating energy. All we're doing is plugging in computer servers. Just like at your house, you have a TV and you have a computer. Neither of those objects are emitting any pollution. No carbon, nothing else comes out of them. That's the same thing a Bitcoin miner is. So you have a custom designed computer. It consists of the fans, the PCB boards, the silicon chips, and aluminum case, and it uses electricity. And that's really the purpose of the first slide, just to show everybody what a Bitcoin miner is. Next slide, Taras, please. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about very briefly what happens when an analog system, something that's existed as a legacy network, something that was not digital, an analog system becomes a digital system. What happens when you take something that's existed as a legacy system and you make it a new system is the legacy participants of the old system, they get upset because they have a lot of vested interest in making sure the old system continues to grow and continues to thrive in the manner in which it's been doing for decades or centuries, however long it's been. And so examples of some analog systems that become digital systems are on this page, and they all have something in common. What they all have in common is as soon as you take an analog system and you convert it, or you have technological advances that allows it to become a digital system, the analog system people, they make the same argument every time. And what they say is this new digital system, it uses too much energy, uses more energy than the analog system. And it really doesn't. It's just easier to quantify the amount of energy that's used in a digital system because it goes through a computer server, so it's easy to measure. And so the easiest one to point out is mail. Okay, it used to go through the Postmaster General. They had trucks and cars and buildings and human beings delivering mail, and then email popped up. Well, guess what the Postmaster General said about email? He said, first of all, the most secure way, and you can look these articles up, the most secure way to deliver information is over the mail, not email. The post office is much more secure. And the second one is sending emails use too much energy because they have to go through these servers. And so the US Postmaster General went to Congress and he tried to outlaw emails, and he had representatives from Congress and the Senate join him in his fight against email. And they tried to first ban it, and then second, they tried to impose a stamp tax on email. And fortunately, they lost, and email continues to exist. Same thing happened when Blockbuster and other movie industry types saw that Netflix was coming out and some of these other streaming services. And they said, you know what? Going to the movies is much more efficient because if you stream a movie over the internet, it uses too much energy. That's because they were able to measure how much energy comes out of a server when you watch a movie. And the last one is institutions that controlled information versus getting that information on the internet. And they said the same thing. If you take information away from institutions and you democratize it over the internet, it uses too much energy. I think they used the metric of 2 megabytes. I think in 1999, yes, it was. In 1999, Forbes wrote an article and they said, information available on the internet is going to destroy the world because every 2 megabytes of information requires a pound of coal to be burned. A pound of coal, which is equivalent to about 50 tweets. And so if all of those metrics held up on all of these examples, they would have killed all of this new technology. And it's really unfortunate that we have the same argument over and over again on an energy use side, but the result is always the same. The technological advances will continue. And in terms of the Bitcoin network, as you heard today, we're 16/100% of the global energy use. We're far less of the carbon emissions. And it's important to really understand what these metrics mean and also what it is we're talking about. What is a miner? And so that's the presentation on the industry today. We're going to yield over to Nick.
Thanks, Darin. Hi, everyone. I want to, first of all, congratulate the Bitcoin Mining Council on reaching 50% of hash rate represented this quarter. It's incredible. So what we're going to be talking about today briefly is a letter written by Jared Huffman and signed by 25 members of Congress, addressed to the EPA, to the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, regarding effectively cryptocurrency mining, mostly focusing on Bitcoin. It's a short letter. It came out on the 20th, so last week. It's only 2 pages, but a true response would take about 100 pages, unfortunately, based on the volume of misconceptions and misleading information in the letter. So what we've done is we've put together some responses to this letter, and we do plan on publishing a response. And so if you're interested in being sort of a co-signatory in the response, please reach out to Taras or myself. We think we've put together something pretty compelling to address some of the lingering misconceptions in this letter. So what we're going to do now is just dive into 8 points made in the Huffman letter and give some very brief responses. So the thrust of the letter really focuses on the claim that Bitcoin is inducing the reopening of thermal power plants. It's based on the conflation of data centers and the emissions from power generation. They repeat the claim around Bitcoin creating e-waste, which is based on a single academic paper. And they claim that Bitcoin mining creates noise pollution. They asked the EPA to evaluate all these things and take action. So just to take some of these statements in turn, one of their first claims is that Bitcoin mining facilities create an outsized contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, as Darin says, there's a huge difference between a data center that engages in Bitcoin mining and the actual generation of the power that data center uses. Now, it's not really the EPA's remit to assess what kind of computation a data center is undertaking. Bitcoin miners and regular old data centers freely buy electricity on the open market and then put it to work in terms of computation. There's no regulatory regime here that distinguishes or seeks to ascertain or determine what is valid computation, what isn't. So it's a very, very uneven standard that the letter kind of lays out. Additionally, even if you warrant this connection between Bitcoin mining data centers and the emissions from power generation, it's clear that the Bitcoin mining industry does not have an outsized contribution to greenhouse gas emissions because the Bitcoin mining industry is disproportionately renewable, as we're revealing through these surveys. There are no other industries that are this sustainable in their energy mix. So if anything, it's an undersized contribution relative to the energy used. Next up, they claim that it's essential to understand the environmental risks and pollution associated with the industry. Just quite factually, there really is no pollution associated with operating a Bitcoin mining data center. There are no waste products generated from running ASICs. There's no effluents. These are not industrial facilities that are leaking toxic waste or dumping them into rivers. These are data centers with computers in them. So you can correlate emissions to generation. You just simply can't to Bitcoin mining data centers. Now, the letter also specifically calls out coal ash ponds for certain associated with certain miners, in particular Greenwich. It's worth noting that the Greenwich facility is a natural gas facility. It was converted from coal to natural gas. And the current operation has nothing to do with coal whatsoever. The existence of the coal ash pond mentioned in the letter is a vestige of the prior operation, which they have committed to eliminating. And so the letter attempts to conflate the Greenwich facility with coal. It's a natural gas power plant, which also provides power to New York State, in addition to mining Bitcoin. They also claim efforts are underway to reopen coal and gas facilities to power the digital asset mining industry. I don't think there's really that much evidence of this, frankly. The general trend is in the other direction of Bitcoin miners committing to sustainability. The trends revealed through these disclosures are a trend towards sustainability. It seems to be going in one direction. We have some of the largest miners in the US already incorporating fully sustainable mandates or announcing them and committing to mitigating their use of fossil fuel-based generation. We listed a few in the letter. If you look at where miners are going, it's places like West Texas with significant growth in wind and solar. So some of these statements seem pretty vague and just not really that supported by reality. Next up, we're going to run through a couple claims which are very, very, you'll all be very familiar with. So they repeat this claim around a Bitcoin transaction could power the average US household for a month. This is just not the case, right? Bitcoin transactions are not redeemable for energy. Bitcoin transactions do not carry energy payloads. You do not need to marshal a specific quantity of energy to push a transaction through Bitcoin. The reason Bitcoin consumes energy is mostly related to issuance. Miner revenue is composed 99% of new issuance and 1% of transaction fees. So the energy expenditure is a function of the subsidy, which is derived from the issuance of new coins. Now, in the long term, it will transition to fees, but in that circumstance, my opinion, opinions differ on this, but I think it's most likely that the fees would be lower structurally because individuals ultimately don't want to pay too high fees. But if you want to understand the energy impact of the Bitcoin network, it's all about forecasting issuance price trends. Those are the sort of key variables. And so there's no way to really correlate Bitcoin transactions to the energy used. Moreover, transactions are more like settlements. Bitcoin should be considered more analogous to something like Fedwire. Fedwire processes trillions of dollars a day with an equivalent number of transactions or final settlements to the Bitcoin network. So you can scale up to a network of arbitrary size financially without scaling up the energy use. Then there's a claim about proof of stake being more efficient or less energy intensive. I think misleading again. Proof of stake gives you fundamentally different assurances from proof of work. It's not clear that it gives you a decentralized system. In my view, proof of stake is just an alternative way to say a shareholder governed financial consortium. And in practice, these networks in the blockchain context end up dominated in proof of stake world by custodians and exchanges. That's where most of the coins end up being based. And so it's very dubious that you get the same level of decentralization. So I think it's very misleading to call it as a more energy efficient system. Lastly, they make this claim again about e-waste, relying just on this Digiconomist, DeVries, and Stoll paper. It's important to read that paper because it's behind a paywall, so I encourage you to actually buy it and read it because it's very misleading. They rely on a 1.3-year period for ASIC depreciation. As everyone listening will know, ASICs are not junked after 1.3 years. Your average ASIC might be lasting 5 years or more. If you look on chain, you can see that there's S9s and S7s are still active. These are ASICs that were released in 2015, 16. So there's just no reason to accept this assumption of a 1.3-year depreciation. Furthermore, ASICs are sold. They have resale value, right? You can see on the secondary market, there's plenty of old ASICs that are sort of active on the secondary market. So those are the main points you made responding to this letter. Again, we're going to be circulating a draft. We'd love for you to join us in being signatories in this response. So I think I will leave it there.
That's great. Thanks, Nick. That was a great response.
Mike, should I go over some of the questions that people have submitted for Q&A?
Yeah, why don't you just go ahead and start to throw them out? Let's work through them.
Sure. So first question is, Bitcoin miners are making use of stranded energy sources that might not be considered renewable by their sources, with an example being stranded natural gas.
You wanna put the panel back up on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, and anybody can take it. So the question again?
So the question is Bitcoin miners are seemingly making use of stranded energy sources that may not be considered renewable by other sources, with an example being stranded natural gas. Is this a trend that we can expect to see continue?
I don't have any opinions. It's unclear. So anybody else have an opinion?
I think we're going to see lots of innovation around where people put miners in the future that coalesce with the different energy sources globally. Wherever there's energy, you will find that people will find a way to put Bitcoin miners there.
Yeah, if I'll only add the scalability of some of these smaller non-renewable energy deposits would certainly be a limiting factor to anything really getting too large. So that's certainly something that will come into question is it worthwhile the capital investment to do some of these smaller sites? Nick, you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for the stranded gas mining use case. I think the scale is probably small. It's hard to know what it is right now. It's probably on the order of 200-300 megawatts is the best estimate I've seen. So it's quite small relative to other forms of generation. And yeah, agreed with your point, Taras. There is, you're managing many different small mining operations on the oil field in remote locations, which is sort of a natural constraint on the sort of efficiency of these operations.
I think if you look at the Bitcoin mining network, there are some people that just want to mine Bitcoin for ideological reasons, and they'll continue. And some people have other reasons to mine it. If you've got stranded natural gas, you might have a different strategic motive. You won't be mining it the same scale, but you'll be mining it for other purposes. There's lots and lots of potential miners with different political or economic circumstances that will probably see benefit. So there's probably benefit from Bitcoin mining to hundreds, if not thousands of different constituencies, all with a different reason for wanting to do it. But the scale, if you're looking at where the hash rate is going to come from, the biggest impact on the hash rate is going to come from extremely well-capitalized Western companies that can raise huge amounts of capital in the capital markets. I think there must be about 24 publicly traded Bitcoin miners. So the ones that will have the biggest impact on hash will be the ones that can raise hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of public capital. And their modus operandi is they're raising huge public capital, and they're going to the edge of the grid to find a very cheap, reliable, sustainable source of energy. And it might be nuclear, it might be hydro, it might be like the ERCOT grid, might be wind or geothermal or something. But as a practical matter, I don't think the public capital markets are are very favorably disposed toward a company that wants to do a ton of carbon-based mining. So I don't think people will be raising huge amounts of capital to do that. So as the network hash rate grows, it'll be public companies that'll be driving it, pursuing extremely favorable renewable sources at the edge of the grid, wherever that might be.
Thanks, Mike. Next question we have is, miners are increasingly co-locating with producers of electricity and or are executing curtailment agreements to stabilize energy grids. These are some of the most productive and green energy inputs, since they make use of otherwise wasted energy regardless of that energy's means of production and improve electrical grid stability. Does the BMC have plans to expand reporting to encompass these groups? I can take this one first if you'd like.
Why don't you start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're actually definitely looking at capturing curtailment data. That's something that it's a data point that we are looking to expand upon for Q2 data collection. So we should be releasing curtailment data for the BMC starting for the next reporting period. Regarding the reporting of other types of production, that's something that we could certainly look into. I'll hand over to Mike or Darin.
I think we want to be thoughtful about the data that we gather, and we started with energy usage and sustainability and efficiency. Curtailment is a logical next place to go, and we'll try to be thoughtful and manage the scope in a progressive fashion, but make sure we focus on quality, not quantity. But I think curtailment is definitely something that would be constructive for us to start to gather.
The last question I have here is the Bitcoin Mining Council reports the percentage of power mix that is sustainable. However, different groups might disagree. Is it possible to expand into different charts? For example, what's the exact breakdown by solar, wind, hydro, tidal, nuclear, geothermal, and then add some sort of geographic qualification on that?
I think the publicly traded companies report a lot of those metrics, and depending on what the SEC comes out with in the ESG mandates that they're talking about, we'll see different reporting. I don't think that really applies to the BMC. We're looking at sustainability metrics, so emissionless energy generation from the source, obviously not from the data center side, but the source power for the BMC right now is running about 58%, and we estimate it'll maintain that approximate value for a while as renewable energy generation facilities look to capitalize. What they look for before they capitalize and begin a development is, are there enough users of the renewable energy to commit whatever the capital funds are needed to build the project? And because there is a taker of that renewable energy in the Bitcoin mining network, in as a buyer and as a flexible purchaser, these new renewable energy facilities will come online, and so we'll look to see that energy mix change in the future as more and more renewable facilities get underway in terms of building out some energy generation in whatever markets they're in.
I think we've got a pretty good sustainability number now. It doesn't include REC credits, so it's pretty high quality. And I think that the first order interesting question is, what's the mix between sustainable and non-sustainable energy sources? And I don't think it's not really our agenda to get into second order questions of wind versus solar and the like. I think we'll leave that for now. We've got better things to focus on.
Sorry, Mike. The last question I have here is, there continues to be gross misunderstanding about Bitcoin mining and its energy use and makeup. How will that change? How can it be changed more quickly? And is there anything specifically the BMC is looking at doing to educate legislators about the benefits of Bitcoin mining?
We'll continue to pursue educational initiatives, and we are. across the board. There's probably too many to name right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just education. I mean, it's a very complicated network. Understanding Bitcoin and its proof of work innovation takes a number of hours, somewhere in the magnitude of thousands of hours of studying to really understand what this network is, what it provides to humanity, and how it's run, what the consensus mechanism is, and what it benefits. How do financial systems, how do economic systems, how do accounting systems, how do all these different systems benefit by living on the Bitcoin network rails, which is an immutable record, immutable transaction record. So there's a lot of education that has to be done. That's one of the reasons it's the genesis story for the Bitcoin Mining Council. I think today somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million people utilize the Bitcoin network globally. And we're really trying to reach some percentage of those people so that they can intelligently discuss the issues that we're putting forth today. And really the best thing that anybody can do if they want to help this network and help the growth and help other users find out about the network is to learn about it and to share the materials that we've provided here today to really combat this narrative that's thrown at us in every direction every single day from people that really aren't doing any research on this industry before they put material out. And so if everybody listening today gets and downloads the information that we've provided, they'll be able to combat these questions, the FUD, the misinformation campaigns that go out on a daily basis against this network. And the real fortunate part of the network is that the facts, if you heard today, the facts are on our side. And so all you need to be armed with are the facts. And then you will destroy every narrative that's thrown at you. So it's a very, very complicated innovation. So there's a lot of work that you have to do to understand this and on both an economics level and an accounting level. But once you understand it, you'll realize the benefits that it will bring the world. And it's really easy to look at the energy statistics that we've provided today, including the carbon statistics, to understand that the narratives that you're hearing are just FUD. They're fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
So, I mean, to summarize that, I think we'll just continue with a quarterly cadence of publishing the best information and best insight we can every quarter, and hosting a briefing like this every quarter where we attempt to bring the best experts and leadership in the industry to a single forum, and then we share it with the world. And then there will be lots and lots of other educational activities that will come from this. But our primary goal at the BMC is to gather and curate some useful industry statistics that can serve as the inputs to educational efforts of everybody else in the community.
Michael, it's 6 o'clock. Do we want to end it, or we've got a few more questions that have trickled in?
Can we just rifle through them real quickly?
For sure. What's the perspective on the proposed European Union mining ban that's currently being discussed?
Obviously, we think that's a bad idea. I would expect that any of these discussions will benefit from an educational effort, and we just need to take the information that we've shared today to any politician or any other figure that has questions or concerns and educate them. And I think that those initiatives will go away, because it would be fairly irrational to block yourself from a 21st century industry as productive and as useful and empowering as digital property.
I think that for the EU, one of the most critical elements to understand is how much energy, because they're trying to ban proof of work and look at all other types of ways to get involved in the Bitcoin network protocol. But the most important metric for the EU is what we went over here today on a global basis. It's how much energy is generated in the EU? How much energy do they generate annually? And we know that number. It's 15,400 terawatt hours of energy is generated every year within the EU's borders. So there's about 15,500 terawatt hours of energy. Well, how much is Bitcoin mining consuming in the EU? And we know that number. We know that number. And Taras can cite it for anybody later. It's 30 terawatt hours of the 15,500 terawatt hours of energy in the EU, which is about 19 basis points. So you get 19/100% of the EU energy runs this consensus mechanism for Bitcoin, which is an inconsequential number. So if they ban it and they use the terminology that they're banning this because of some carbon footprint or the energy use within its borders, you just know that's not true. It's not true, because if they shut it off, nothing happens to their energy footprint. And so there's something else going on more insidious inside the EU on why they want to ban this technology. And it probably has to do with the freedom that it provides the citizens of every country on the planet Earth. And so that's really a metric that's important to understand within anyone's borders. If they talk about shutting the Bitcoin network down and they blame it on some type of energy metric, it's really easy to go and look at how much energy that country generates every year, and then look at the footprint of the energy for the Bitcoin network within its borders, and then really determine from that statistic, is it a meaningful number or something else going on? And in the EU, it's indisputable that there's something else going on. This isn't an energy problem. There's some other issue that these legislators don't like, and it would be better if they just be honest about it. Like, just tell us the truth. Tell us what's your real concern. And so that's really what's going on in the EU. It's hard to figure out because it's just not true what they're saying.
Okay, Taras, why don't we just wrap it up here, because now we're at the hour.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you to everybody that joined us today. And as Darin pointed out, please share the press release, share the presentation, share the information. As we educate the world, I think we'll find more Bitcoin advocates in every corner of the industry. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.